So, afternoon everyone. I'm going to talk you through a little bit of work that we did in one of the DCMS 5G test beds and trials programs last year, the 5G Smart Tourism project, working with a number of partners in the Bristol and Bath area to look at what a 5G enabled experience could potentially offer to visitors in a heritage tourist location. So you might think, why on earth is the BBC interested in tourism? Partially this is because that's what the money provided by DCMS was supposed to let us investigate. But actually, the idea of trying to give innovative experiences to people in a location, to teach them about stuff, to make it fun and engaging, that's all about inform, educate and entertain, which is what the heart of what the BBC does. So if we can understand the technology and the use cases, how people react to it, how we can best use these sort of new emerging networks, we're learning stuff that will be really useful, not just for people offering services at tourism sites, but for all kinds of experiences that the BBC and other content makers might want to offer in the future. So, we were faced with the question, how do we demonstrate what a 5G future service might be able to offer to visitors at the Roman Baths, who are one of the other partners in the project? So we thought about the stories that you want to try to tell and how you might want to try to add to an existing experience rather than just duplicate what it is that the Roman Baths visitor experience at the moment does so well. So out of interest, who in the audience has visited the Roman Baths in Bath? That's a surprisingly good number. That's an indication perhaps of the fact that on a good day they have 4,000 visitors through their doors every day. It is a huge visitor machine with people churning through. So a couple of pictures here of what the baths looked like when they were being renovated in the Victorian times, in the sort of late 1800s, and how they look today with a group of visitors. So in discussions we had with the Roman Baths, and we also worked very closely with partners at Aardman Animations who actually did all the creative work in terms of the material you'll see. We talked through what are the stories that a sort of AR or VR experience could help tell that go beyond what it is that the Roman baths tell us about what the baths were like in Roman times. And one thing that became obvious, perhaps inspired by pictures like this, is that the Roman baths have been there for a very long time. From before the Romans arrived in the country, there were hot springs and there were a lot of mythical stories about what might have happened, all the way through to the Victorian times where they were being renovated. And even speaking to some of the historians at the baths, they told us about some quite wild parties that happened in the 1970s, which could have been interesting to visualise, but thinking that this was a family experience we're aiming for, perhaps we'd stick with something slightly different. So we looked at what periods of time, other than the Roman period, would tell an interesting story. And this was also nice because that's quite a generic thing to do, to let you look at a place you're in through different periods of time. So exploring that as a use case and what 5G and high data rate, rich visual experiences could bring to it felt like a useful thing to look at. So we ended up looking at 3 different periods of the Roman Baths history. Going back to 860 BC, when legendary King Bladud of England, or whatever bit of England it might have been at the time, was apparently thrown out from his from the court when he was still a prince because he got leprosy. He apparently discovered this strange hot spring in Bath. He ended up as a pig farmer, having to make his living somehow or other, and noticed that his pigs that also suffered from some funny skin ailment, when wallowing in the mud, they magically got themselves cured. So he thought he'd have a wallow in the mud himself. His leprosy was cured, and he went on to become King of England and then founded the city of Bath. And if you'll believe that, you'll believe anything. But it makes a lovely animated story. We then looked as well at the post-Roman period, when the Romans had left and the baths were starting to fall into ruin. In particular, there was a huge arch ceiling over the top of the Great Bath, which, as it was left to fall apart, eventually fell into the bath itself. And that gave a lovely opportunity to visualise to people as a sort of augmented reality experience what the roof actually looked like. That was one of the things that VR or AR can really bring, is a sense of scale and place to look up and see what used to be there. And then we looked at a third period when the baths were being renovated in Victorian times, turning them into the sort of kind of visitor experience that people have now. So in terms of the technology, we looked at what's known as the sort of magic window paradigm. So, in fact, thinking of the talk that we had in the first part of the session today about, ultimately lightweight AR glasses will be available to let people visualize things, not available, unfortunately, at a sort of level that we could give loads of visitors to the Roman baths. So instead we went for the approach known as magic window, where you're holding up a mobile phone. I have one here that I acquired earlier. You would be able to look through it. We're measuring position and orientation of the phone and showing you what you would see through that bit of space. So this gives you the feeling of space, looking up at the roof, looking down at the floor, and so on. So we worked with Aardman Animations to produce 3 animated models of what the baths looked like. So these were essentially static scenes, but with a bit of natural motion. So there's rippling water, there were flickering flames. We added some interactive overlays so that as you looked around, you'd discover bits of information about what you were looking at, trying to almost gamify what people would see, trying to think about what level of interaction people want in this sort of experience. And we thought this was probably a good starting point. We, my colleagues in BBC R&D, produced a mobile app that delivered this magic window experience. But to look particularly at what 5G might enable, we looked at 2 different ways of delivering this rich sort of visual experience to people. One was to pre-render as 360 video a view of the model of the baths at one of these 3 periods of time, viewed from a chosen viewpoint in the bath. So we worked out where best it would be to stand to explain to people the story we were trying to tell about the Victorian period. And then we rendered a view of the Victorian scene from that location. And we then triggered the video to run by pointing the phone at a marker that was put on a little stand. So we knew people must be standing by that marker. And that actually also lined up the orientation correctly. So they'd trigger their phone off that and they'd look around. But we also looked at an approach that we were referring to as remote rendering, or to put it into the parlance of 5G, edge compute capability. So rather than rendering the model in real time, rather than rendering it in advance and just streaming the video file to the phone, we'd actually have a computer. In this case, it was a pile of computers with GPUs in them, based at the University of Bristol, one of the other partners, linked through various bits of network technology, including the first UK deployment of a 60 gigahertz self-organising mesh network from project partner CCS. So we tracked the location and position of the phone, and every frame we were sending the location information over the network down to Bristol. It was rendering an image, sending it back, and we had a round-trip latency of quarter of a second, tenth of a second, something like that. That then enabled people not actually just to stay in a fixed position, but to walk around. You could start looking around the back of a statue or look down at the floor, because we were tracking the full position of the phone, so-called 6 degrees of freedom, to put in another buzz phrase. So it was interesting to do this comparison both from a technology point of view and the user experience point of view. And I've got a little video here that this shows the 360 video version. That's one of the trigger images. This was during one of the evening trials we did in December last year. We had to do these as closed trials in the evening, which was a little bit of a shame. I really wanted to unleash it on the 4,000 visitors per day that came through. But this at least meant that we could provide phones that we knew would work. They were fairly high-end phones. We could also do it in a reasonably controlled way so that we could get people to fill in a user survey at the end. And for most of the people that went through it, we interviewed them. So we had a good structured interview and got a lot of user feedback on what they actually thought. So this is I think they're looking there at the Victorian period, launching it off the trigger image and finding some of the little hotspots that would give people information on what they saw. So it was very interesting looking at some of the challenges of deploying this sort of thing in this sort of heritage environment. Even the problems of where you put the masts or the antenna for the various different kinds of radio links we were trying. Even if you attach something to a concrete pillar that's a part of the baths but not a historical part, you still need planning permission for that because it's a Grade 1 listed monument. There were all sorts of interesting challenges. We debated as well about should we perhaps have an audio track that went with this, get people to wear headphones, and the discussions with the people at the Roman Baths was that could be a safety risk. People might not be able to hear what was going on around them. People might get cords tangled. So it was interesting to see when we did the feedback as to whether people felt that audio was something that was missing. So, as I said, we ran trials both on 2 evenings in December 18, and we did the remote rendering trial one evening, March 19. And it was interesting to see the range of people coming through, particularly to see families with young kids who really engaged with this. And there was a group of boys who were busy showing each other what they discovered. And again, another interesting thing about headset use as distinct from Magic Window, you can show somebody, look what I've seen over here, can you find this? So it turned it into quite a shared experience, which was nice. These are some of the findings that we had from the user trial. So we asked people questions like, if a visitor attraction offered this sort of thing, would you be more likely to visit? The fact that we'd given them wine and mince pies while we were asking them the questions at the end might have helped. And in fact, I wanted to do a nice little bit of subjective testing for how many glasses of wine do you have to give someone that you get as good an answer without actually having to give them the mobile application in the first place. But it was reassuring that over 80% of the people said they would be more likely to visit. And 80% of the users rated the video quality that we were delivering over this 5G-like network as excellent or good. But perhaps more fun is when you look at some of the responses we got from people in the interview. So we were able to explore some of the usability questions. So there's this whole business about, actually, is this Magic Window paradigm, does that work all right? The screen size is quite small. Particularly some of the older visitors struggled to read some of the print on it. And we were slightly concerned that people would much rather have a bigger screen. But we got some interesting comments like, actually the small screen size wasn't so bad because people are primarily there to see the real physical baths. And if they're looking at some massive screen, they're missing the fact that they're really there. What you want is the augmentation of the bit I'm looking at there used to look like this. So actually a small device wasn't such a bad thing. And there, we had other comments that you can read about pros and cons of this versus information boards, and we had quite a lot of comments on the audio. People really missed the fact that we deliberately tried to make this silent, and I think if we were doing it again, we'd have fun with those Bose AR glasses. I don't know if anyone's come across those AR audio glasses that basically just put 2 speakers either side of your ears. They're really amazing. Because you don't feel you're wearing anything over your ears, your brain just tells you the sound must be coming from the real world. So you could imagine, you could hear King Bladud's pigs wallowing in the mud in front of you, or something like that would be great fun. So, as always, we're asked to end with a prediction. So, from my side, I think if we believe what we're seeing with what 5G could provide in terms of huge data pipes that would enable this kind of experience without us having to worry about getting phones connected to special Wi-Fi networks, or do people have the right data plan and so on, that will no longer be a limiting factor in delivering this sort of thing. But what will always be important is, do those experiences actually offer real value to users? And particularly as it becomes easier and easier to do these things, the wow factor of, gosh, I can do this, will rapidly go away. And it becomes much more about, does this really add to the experience? Do people get value from it? Is it giving them information or entertainment in a way that they couldn't get with what's already there? So that was essentially what we learned. And in short summary, it was really good fun to play with something that was a bit different from normal broadcast. And if anyone wants to come and have a play at the end, I happen to have brought a device with me, and you can sit and explore the baths in 3 different time periods. Thanks very much.